Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the people of the Wurrung and Burrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations, the traditional owners of the land on whose unceded lands we meet today, well, where I am anyway today, and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present and future. I also pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of Australia and hope the path towards reconciliation continues to be shared and embraced. So thank you. Let's just see if I can transition. Hopefully my slides are transitioning on your end. Is that correct, Sally? Are they transitioning there? Beautiful. Okay.
Yes, they are.
So for those of you that don't know me, I am associate. My name is Angela Carbone, and I'm an Associate Deputy Vice Chancellor, Learning, Teaching and Quality for the STEM College at RMIT. But prior to that, I also held leadership roles at Swinburne University as the Dean Learning Innovation and at Monash University as the Director of Educational Excellence. And I've had sort of leadership positions since 2010, but before that, I served as an academic in the field of computing, starting in the early 1990s. And I really came to understand the immense influence of technology and innovation from a really young age. As you can see in that photo, I grew up on a poultry farm. That's where I grew up. There's a picture of the farm there, and it was back in the mid-60s. And that's my dad there holding, I think, a baby lamb it was. And my daily routine as a child often involved things like collecting and grading eggs, washing eggs, tending to chickens, feeding them, helping my dad on those sweltering hot days, hose the pens down from the roof to keep the chickens cool so they didn't die. We had a farm of 5,000 chickens. And despite my upbringing on a farm, I actually knew I didn't want to pursue a career as a farmer or a farmer's helper. And the chicken smell, I don't know if any of you visited a poultry farm, wasn't exactly my cup of tea. And as I reflect on my upbringing, I can't help think about the relentless manual labour that my father dedicated himself to. When you've got livestock, you don't have a weekend off. Animals need to be fed, they need to drink, they need to be catered for. And I watched my father grapple with, as a young age, the evolving landscape of technology and automation and innovation. And that was sort of steadily happening around us. And we had many discussions around the farm is very sort of labour driven. Should we automate? The problem is my father was so adamant that his children had to get an education that none of us wanted to take on the family business. And we could see the world that was evolving. My father didn't really have anyone to hand the business to. So he had to make a really difficult decision in his life, and that was whether to completely automate a manual farm or retire. And because none of his children wanted to continue in the farming business, he decided to retire. And I guess as educators, we've also had to make these pivotal decisions as we see technology coming in. Do we want to change our practice? Do we have the energy, the knowledge, the support to change our practice, or do we continue on with what we do, or do we leave the sector completely? And it was interesting, my dad was around 60, he felt it was probably, he didn't have the people to carry on with the business. So as I said, he decided to retire. Okay, so when I look back at my journey, right back from a child, on a farm, and we used to walk to school. It was, quite common to walk to school those days in the farm area. And I remember my childhood began with chalk and blackboards. And I used to love chalk and blackboards. That was my favourite, I used to love, and that was one of the roles that I remember, a teacher teaching in chalk with chalk and blackboards. And hopefully some of you that are connected can remember those days when you were in primary school. And then when I reached high school, we transitioned to whiteboards and water-based markers. And then I was the first in my family to actually enter university. And it was those times where we were using overhead projectors, and they took sort of centre stage of those big lecture halls. And I remember as a student, the dial-up modems where we had to connect to the university computer. Mobile phones, I don't think were even out at that stage. But it's really fascinating to sort of look back and how things have evolved. And then soon after the overhead projectors came the audio-visual equipment as a standard part of the educational experience. And I'm sure some of you would have experienced those changes that I experienced too. So it was in the 1990s when I actually secured my first teaching position. And that was at the time when the World Wide Web came about. I'm taking you back down a memory lane. And I remember we were so busy creating those web pages, you know, because I was teaching program and all the programmers we were the first to get our web pages up, writing HTML. And being a programmer, I was teaching programming to my students. And as a student, I learned Fortran, but as a teacher, I taught Pascal, I taught Turing, I taught C, C++, Java, and the list just kept going on. Like it just changed every year. And I was never really able to actually use the same set of notes that I had the previous years because things had changed so much. Not just the programming language, but the actual computer that we used had changed as well. You know, we had Apple Macs, we had desktops, we had MacBooks, and we had iPads, we had workstations. So that continually evolved as well. As I progressed in my career, I managed to supervise a couple of honours students. And I was really, at that point, having just gone through my childhood, seeing my father, you know, have to make that difficult decision around whether to embrace technology or move, I thought this was a real opportunity for me to work with my students to embrace technology, to try and improve the learning experience we gave our students. And it was in 1996-97 where I supervised a couple of honours students, and we worked on a couple of applications, one of them which actually led to a Best Paper Award. And this is before learning management systems came about. And the paper was on the computer-aided dynamic assessment and learning quiz. And that was a quiz that sort of produced individualised and randomised quizzes for every student. So the quizzes were sort of tailor-made, there was automatic grading, there was generated visual reports for the academics so then they could gain insights into their students' learning. So that was really sort of innovative back in that time, right? The other one was what we called a graphical student progress indicator. And that was offering students a graphical sort of visualization of their performance compared to their tutorial, compared to their whole lecture group. So the student actually got to see how they were progressing, and the academics got a warning sign if students were falling behind. Again, not innovative now, but very innovative back then. And the other one was around an automatic timetable generator where I had a group of tutors, I had 10 tutors, and assigning them to classes was a real manual task, and I was trying to automate it. And it was, and as Sally mentioned, I was one of the first female academics to get the Prime Minister's Award for Teacher of the Year. And it was because of these innovations, not just the technology innovations, but other innovations that got me those awards. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So as I progressed through my academic career, and there's a lovely young photo of me there, I'll go to an old one. This is when I got my PhD. I got my PhD, and then that allowed me to supervise PhD students. And one of my students delved into factors shaping pedagogical practices with a specific focus on the influence of technology and the emerging digitally based pedagogies. And my student actually shed some light on something that many of us as educators have observed firsthand, and that's the transformative power of technology in the realm of learning and teaching. And as she delved deeper into her explanation, she came across a significant concept that emerged from her study, and that was the techno-pedagogical practice. For those of you that were in the parallel sessions, you would have heard some of this mentioned by Michelle Spencer in her presentation. But what does that exactly mean? So techno-pedagogical practice suggests that in today's ever-evolving educational landscape, we should actively engage in three essential dimensions. One, refining our teaching practice. Two, continuously developing our pedagogical philosophy. And three, embracing the adoption of technology. And it's a concept that speaks at the heart of what many of our educators do in every day, striving to enhance their teaching and learning practices in an increasing digital world. So throughout my career, I've had the privilege of witnessing firsthand some remarkable transformation of education fueled by technological advances. And you probably remember, well, I remember when I started uni, the 2-hour didactic lecture, half the students at the back were asleep, the middle section didn't want to be there, but they've lost their appeal now. Every university is trying to move away from that, those long didactic talks, and they're slowly replacing them by well-produced videos where students can pause, they can rewind and play at twice the speed, and they can play it at their own convenience. Then universities started to adopt learning management systems, and this was a great way to house all the learning and teaching assets and digital tools. Concepts like blended learning and the flipped classroom came into the pedagogical scene. And educators at the time knew they had to blend their courses, but didn't know exactly how and didn't know what to blend. And that was another PhD. That was another PhD product of one of my other PhD students. So if I reflect on, still moving down the journey of learning and teaching, it actually wasn't until MOOCs. They had this, there was a real fear when MOOCs came out. Many academics thought that was going to be a real disruption or a real competitor for institutions. So when they came out, I know there was a concern about, and I was in an executive meeting at the time, and one of the senior executives said, I'm really scared that I'm going to turn around tomorrow and we'll have no students. They'll all go online because they can learn everything online. Well, in fact, that actually didn't happen. But what did happen is universities started to enter that market. They wanted to play around with that new sort of technology that was out there. The universities were pushing blended learning even more, gave them more impetus to push the blended learning and to incorporate that online teaching and make that online teaching really good. So there was a bit of a shift when MOOCs came on the scene back in the early 2010s. And even though, there was a big hoo-ha about them, there wasn't a mass exodus from the traditional university education. Instead, numerous universities actually chose to embrace MOOCs and offer their own MOOC. Then, later, 2019, we had COVID. And COVID really forced academics to fully embrace the digital tools and blended learning, and actually even online learning, especially in Melbourne, where we're in lockdown for a very long time. So universities, when they came out of COVID, which we are coming out of, even though there's, I hear, a new variant out at the moment, but universities saw that as an opportunity to permanently integrate digital tools and online components into the traditional way that they educated. And so a whole new range of tools surfaced. They were probably there, but probably not used as much after the COVID pandemic. I mean, how many of us used Zoom before the pandemic? Occasionally. Microsoft Teams is a big thing that many of us are using, but there's things like making the videos more interactive with H5P. There's a whole Adobe Creative Suite that's come out. And so all the tools that have come out are really there to sort of help the students with sharing ideas, creatively presenting content, and mirror how we engage in our offline lives. So they're there to facilitate that sort of engagement. They provide a virtual setting where academics can adopt those digital tools to try and improve that experience we give to our students. And also because our students now are having to work and study at the same time. So it gives them that flexibility of when to study. And as we see technology evolving, and I'll come back to this because the next part is the generative AI, but back in the day of the MOOCs, when people were adopting all of those new sort of tools, we saw in my own institution, I'll give you 3 examples here, we saw a number of academics adopting some of the, virtual experiences. We had Professor Nick Conley, also last year's recipient of a National Teaching Award. It's really interesting how some of these recipients who got teaching awards have really looked at how can they embed technology into their teaching to improve the learning experience. Professor Nick Conley is an aviation academic, and she devised a virtual world where students could explore a plane crash site, and then visit the sites and investigate those sites, and then they had to write a reflection on it. So they actually had their iPad with them. They went out in the field, so they actually felt like there was a real plane, and they could see all the areas where the plane had hazard areas. Jessica Danaher also received a National Teaching Award. She's from RMIT, and she looked at embedding some digital tools in her assignment. So she changed her assignment, so she got students creating podcasts, developing their own videos, building websites, and for her teaching practice and how students engage with all of that, she was also awarded a recognition as well. And I'll mention someone else, Donald Vlodkovich, also from RMIT, hasn't submitted for a National Teaching Award, but actually got a RMIT award, and that was around embedding the virtual laboratory, that simulation. So students that couldn't come on campus got to experience that laboratory, and they could perform a task as many times as they liked before they actually could come to class. And this was really useful for large classes, and it gave students time to practice. And in fact, we have got a whole centre now of digital innovation. James Harlan, who presented in the parallel session probably just before I did, and we have an AR/VR developer that's working on creating applications to assist students in their learning. So creating applications in collaboration with academics that might be helping students to visualise an atom in 3D as part of chemistry, or look at a cell in 3D, or navigating Indigenous places, or understanding the digestive tract. Imagine if you could, go into the digestive tract and see how food is digested. So a whole heap of applications that are coming out of the centre, which is really great to see. But and Sally, I haven't been keeping time. How much time have I got? 10 minutes?
You've got about another 10 minutes, yes.
Fantastic. All right, I'm starting to wrap up. So another sort of, I guess, disruption or maybe competitor is the generative AI, in particular ChatGPT. So that's something that is a phenomenon that's actually captured global attention. Artificial intelligence, it's captured everybody's attention. I was just looking at some of the presentations before, when I thought my presentation was at 8:40, of the number of participants in this conference that are presenting on how they've transformed their assessments to incorporate the use of artificial intelligence. And it's no different here. It's become part of our everyday conversation. So, it's really interesting now to see that we're having these natural and more intelligent conversations with machines, with our computers. So this is really, shifted the way in which we work and learn and communicate. And it's something that, we have experienced over the last year. I know I use ChatGPT myself. If ever I want to sort of write something that's very diplomatic, I always ask ChatGPT to make it more diplomatic, which is great. So it's great having that sort of assistant there with you. But I see academics using it in many different ways. It's actually opened up sort of new horizons in higher education, and its potential to sort of really revolutionise teaching by assisting educators in generating instructional materials. I've seen that happen. Producing marking rubrics, we've seen that being used in that space, but also in evaluating assessments. So, ChatGPT capable of producing text, audio, visuals that really closely resemble how a human would interact or speak. And so that's raised a concern for academics, because it's raised a concern around, the product that students might submit. Is it their work, or is it authentic work, or is it the produce of ChatGPT? And it's almost impossible to detect. So, so academics are really having to use creative ways to make students, embrace the tool, but also educate them around ethical issues of using the tool. So, there's a number of factors that we've been discussing at RMIT and Australia, and that is, we've seen high schools outright ban ChatGPT. That hasn't been the position that universities have taken. Universities want to consider integrating ChatGPT and advances in AI into their students' education. But I guess the pivotal question for academics is, how should we adapt and design our assessments for the future? And this is where the work of a group of people comprising of our Tertiary Education Quality Standard Agency, TEQSA, in consultation with higher education experts in assessment, in AI, and in academic integrity, have come together to release this assessment reform for the digital age. And that assessment reform covers sort of suggests that academics should adapt two sort of approaches to designing their assessment. The first one is assessment design should adopt a more programmatic approach. And the second one is there should be greater emphasis on the learning process. And so we're seeing universities, take up these recommendations, and academics sort of working within these recommendations as well. So this is something that's just been released. It was released in August of this year, and it's worth looking at for those that haven't. So RMIT recognises its responsibility to prepare students for an AI-driven future, and it's taken steps to try and proactively equip students with the knowledge and skills to harness artificial intelligence appropriately. So they've developed a set of robust policies and frameworks. The first one is the RMIT capabilities. And one of the key areas in the capabilities we want to develop in our students is students to become digitally adept. So, digital fluency is a really important part, as well as ethically global citizenship. So that's the ethics and becoming digitally adept are two key amongst others. We've also got an assessment framework to ensure that all assessments and activities are structured to be active, applied, and authentic. And we've got a, explanation of what that means. And then we've also have the academic integrity policy, like most universities, and that acts as a resource for both staff and students to ensure that, they are they get direction on appropriate practices related to academic integrity. So we've seen our academics embrace generative AI. We just had a showcase last week, and we've had a number of academics. This was a key panel session for us as well. And we heard from a number of academics from different areas talking about how they embrace generative AI. One of the academics in health got the students to explore how AI technology can improve patient care. Students had to write a piece on it, and then they got ChatGPT to write a piece on it, and then they compared the two. And when they compared the two, they had to write a reflective response on what ChatGPT produced and what they produced. We've got chemical engineering using ChatGPT to help students sort of find inspiration and initiate ideas. And then they have to cross-reference or check the references that ChatGPT produced. And then we've got another academic who talked about changing her assignment so that keeping the same assignment, but changing it so now students need to demonstrate the search strategies that they put into ChatGPT. So what questions did they ask ChatGPT, and how did those responses help refine their search? So a lot of work is happening and examples, and I'm sure you've heard many more examples through the forum this morning. So I want to leave you with my final word, and that is that, the first university, and I believe it was the University of Bologna, dated back in, 1088, and they've still existed. And they've weathered numerous sort of technological advancements and potential disruptions. However, generative AI and robotics require the capability to anticipate students' learning needs. And so the question arises, will universities still hold a vital role in educating students of the future? So I believe universities will still exist. Teaching and learning is one part of the university, that research is another. But it does sort of beg the question is, what will be the role of universities if we're going to have generative AI and another area, which is predictive AI, which I haven't touched on, what will be their role in the future? Interesting to see what the next, 100-year journey looks like as universities evolve. That's it from me. Thank you very much, Sally. Happy to take questions.